Alright, so in this video we're gonna go through using the command line, and on Windows it's becoming a standard to use PowerShell, at least to some extent. With that said, you can of course still use the original command prompt. PowerShell just have some more advanced features that you can also use. So if you want to open PowerShell, we can just go into the start and type PowerShell and it'll be there. And it's just gonna start up in your home folder. In many cases this is not what you want, and you can view the path kind of like the Explorer in Windows, but you have another UI for it than you'd usually have. So if we go into this folder I have up here, you can type CD, which stands for change directory, and then we can grab this path and just paste it. And this will then change the current directory we're in. And if I then type dir like this, we can read what's inside this, and what we can see is also that this is the same content as the Windows Explorer is showing us. However, if we use the command line, we also have a lot of other commands that we can run within this folder, such as making a new directory, like so. And you'll also see that this is applied immediately to the same directory. This is useful when you're, for example, working with many development tools, because they come with command line interfaces that you have to work with. In this case, we're also using Docker. And it's important when you start, for example, a Docker Compose, that it's within the same folder as Docker. So right now, if we type Docker Compose, it's gonna complain because, or actually, if we start Docker Compose, it's gonna complain because it can't find a Docker Compose.yaml file. And that's because we're within this directory right now, as you can see, and that's problematic. So if we look up here, there's no Docker Compose file. So what we can do instead, let's just list the current directory again. We can also say ls instead of dir. And this will give the content, and we can see that there's a directory right here. This is also shown with the D over here. So we're gonna press CD, and then just for the sake of it, if I press L, you can press tab, and then it's gonna just finish it off by itself. And that's really fast when you want to go through the command line and go through directories, and I can really recommend that. So let's change directory. I'm gonna go into lecture 1, and just for the sake of this video, I'm gonna do the same in here so we can see what's in here. Alright, so if I press ls, we'll see that this is the same as we can see over here, and everything is in sync. And we do see that this actually has the Docker Compose file, which is needed for Docker. So yeah, now we can press Docker Compose up. With that said, I probably should start Docker, so let's just boot that up real quick. And we're ready to go. And now Docker is up and running. It's been booted from this Docker Compose file because we're in the same directory. So it's worth noting now that this shell is no longer interacted with because Docker is pretty much consuming it. And it's gonna keep doing that until we exit out of it. But let's just check that Docker is running as it should. I'm gonna go into localhost port, wrong port. There we go. And there we go. You can even see that Docker is immediately responding to this request, and if you keep doing this, you can see the GET request in the background. Anyway, if we want to go out of this kind of right now, like as you can see when I type, nothing happens, and this is normal. If I press Control C, it's gonna stop, and it's gonna force it to stop. So in this case, we can instead, for example, type Docker Compose up -d or -d, and this is just gonna make Docker run in the background instead. So if I haven't run this yet, but if I go over to the Firefox or your browser, I refresh, nothing is gonna happen because Docker is not running, and thus our container is no longer running. If I do this, it's gonna start the container. I'm gonna reload, it's up and running. But right now, I can still use the shell. There we go. And if we wanna turn that off again, or just turn off, we can just enter stop, and it's gonna do the same as when I press Control C. So it's worth noting that there's different commands works differently. Some commands are global, and some other commands expect something within your path. So in this case, for example, Docker is using the local or the Docker compose file, the YAML we found within this directory right here. But we can, for example, always type Docker PS. This is gonna give us a complete list of the containers that are currently running, and that doesn't really matter if we're within this directory or any other one. So that's really easy to use. The same goes if we're using telnet. Anyway, so another thing that's also useful, instead of going into PowerShell every time you want to go into a directory, for example, as you were seeing before, I can do this, paste it, and we're there. Instead of doing this, there's a quick way in Windows. If you hold down Shift and just press anywhere within the directory, not on the file, but if you press like out here, this little command comes up, and we can open PowerShell right here. This is gonna go directly into this directory by default, and that's just a really nice way to easily access a folder. And I highly recommend that you use this when you're doing this. So just quickly on the topic again. So we have global commands that can be used everywhere, like the Docker. The Docker also has commands that has to be used within the current folder. If, for example, if you're trying to run a Docker file, but for the sake of this, it's okay to just run it anywhere. Git needs to be done within a Git directory, if you didn't already know. So yeah, pay attention to your path, and remember that you can always use tab to travel through the directories. If you want to go back a directory, we can say cd and then ... and this will go one step back. And then if we press cd again, we can then press tab, and it's gonna show us the possibilities, and we can keep hitting tab until we find what we need. Sometimes it's better to just kind of give it a hint. So if we know we want to go into lecture 1 like before, we can say L and just press tab, and there we go. I hope you've learned a little from this video. Thank you for watching.